In human relationships, when people are unable to trust each other, then long term agreements fall apart. In the US economy, contracts are one of the pillars of the market economy that allow businesses to set long term goals and have long term agreements with suppliers and customers and um, people and businesses that without which our economy would not function very well. That's what we're going to look at today. So the role of the government in the economy begins with setting up the economy. A government must put certain things in place in order to have a market economy function well. And so the US government sets up the game of the economy in a certain way. Our founding fathers wrote the US Constitution, and the Constitution describes how our government will operate. And as it's operating, people are elected to office and make decisions and vote and create laws that have an impact on our economy and shape and form our economy. The first thing that the government does to set up the economy is to establish legal tender or currency. That's one of the three pillars of a market economy. Currency is fundamental to having something that people can trade that they can trust. And so if you're just dealing business to business or person to person, you may or may not trust them fully. But if the US government backs up its currency and says, this is our currency and we support it, and by law needs to be able to be accepted as payment, then people can trust it. The US Constitution gives Congress the power to coin money, and in the US dollar cannot be refused as payment for most transactions. When our founding fathers after the Revolutionary War, each state had the authority to create their own currency, and this inhibited trade and made our 13 states function like 13 countries. So when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they gave Congress the power to establish money for all the states, and that facilitated trade. You can imagine if you have a semi full of apples in Sparta, Michigan, and you wanted to take them down to Texas, and if you had to trade currency at the state line for every state and maybe pay taxes and have a different system of regulation, how it would make it expensive and cumbersome, and it would inhibit trade between the states. Well, establishing a universal currency for the United States is one way, the first way that the government sets up the economy. The second pillar of the market economy is contracts, which might seem maybe odd at first, but when you think about it, business cannot function well without contracts that are enforced and backed up by the US government. So if you were doing business with someone and you had a contract with them and then they just broke the contract and refused to pay you for something, how it would make you not trust them and in the future not trust other people or business people. But because the US government backs up contracts with the rule of law and with the court system, people feel like they can trust a contract with someone because they have recourse. If it doesn't work out the way they want, they can sue, take the other party to court. And we have laws and courts and a whole system set up to deal with this. Contracts are legal obligations between two or more parties and are enforceable in a court of law. And without this enforcement, it would be impossible to make long-term business agreements. And so what would happen is people would make short-term agreements, and therefore it'd be very difficult to build a factory and a supply chain and trust it. Because if one component doesn't work out, then it messes up the whole operation. Contracts are any agreement between parties. It could be verbal, but the problem with verbal contracts is if you have a disagreement and you go to court, you just have each other's word to go on. They can be written on a napkin by a lay person, and that's better. But again, if there's a disagreement, then when you get to court and argue your case, you're not going to have a lot to back it up, because a contract written on a napkin will have a lot of contingencies that are not taken care of. And so having a lawyer draft a contract and have both parties sign it is the best way to do business. A lot of unforeseen circumstances can happen. For example, one person might pass away and leave their business to someone else, and does the contract still apply? Or maybe one company gets bought out by another company, and what happens to the contract then? There's all sorts of scenarios where disagreements can arise from sincere parties. And so if you have a contract written by a lawyer, that's been thought through, and they put statements in there that try to clarify the agreement in every contingency. The third pillar of the market economy is property rights. Property rights, again, might seem an odd pillar of a market economy, but when you think about it, if you don't have some legal way to own something, then it becomes a free-for-all. Someone could steal your tractor, your car, your delivery vehicle, and how are you going to have recourse in the court system if the court system and the government does not recognize your right to private property in the first place? So titles, even contracts, stocks, all these things recognize private property. And so if you live in a country that does not recognize private property, and you have a farm and someone squats on your farm or takes it over, then you can only maintain whatever you can defend. But if the US government recognizes private property, and that allows you the freedom and confidence to buy 300 acres and to expand your factory, because you know the investment will be worth it because the government's going to recognize it. And so no one will take it from you without a fight in court. And so the rule of law and recognizing private properties and private property rights is a pillar of a market economy. Without the protection of private property, citizens wouldn't be safe to take risks and to build and create. If you had a car, but there was no title and the government did not recognize a title, then you would be more hesitant to improve it and customize it, because if someone stole it, then you would have no recourse. But because the government does recognize private property and titles of vehicles, then it allows you the freedom to improve it and invest in it, knowing that if something happened, the government will recognize that it was your property. My friend knew the guy who started Jack's Salsa, and at one point Jack's Salsa was the most popular fresh salsa in the country. And then at one point they bought out this other salsa company, not because they wanted their recipe, but because that other salsa company had a contract with the US military to provide salsa to the military. And so that contract was worth something. So the government recognized the contract, the government recognized private property and ownership, and so that made that contract with the military valuable. And my cousin works for the American Soccer Association, and he talks to soccer players from around the world trying to recruit them to play for the United States teams. And he says that players from around the world will accept a contract in the United States for less money because they know it's guaranteed, as opposed to accepting a contract in a second world country, for example, that might be more lucrative, but if you don't play well the first year, they might just not pay your contract for the second and third year. And what are you going to do about it if the government doesn't back you up? So having the assurance of rule of law, a stable currency, and recognizing property rights allows the game of the US economy to function, or any market economy. Private property includes land, leases, stocks, patents, trademarks, businesses, as well as physical goods. So Tesla is always coming up with new patents. They filed a patent to have a laser be a windshield wiper. They filed a patent to have their semi tires inflate automatically on the fly. They have a patent to have headlights that software controls the light so that they're able to sell those same lights on those same cars in different countries and meet the regulations of different countries. And so we saw the Bill Gates video where he had a contract with IBM, and IBM wanted to buy the source code after they had signed a contract, and Bill Gates' father was a lawyer, of course, and he would not sell him the source code, meaning he could monopolize the disk operating system and sell it to IBM and Dell and Gateway and HP and any other company. So that contract is what made Bill Gates a billionaire. So very significant in a market economy. All right, the quiz is an open quiz. You can use your notes. Hopefully you'll get 5 out of 5. There's another video lecture after this on 3.4. And then after that, you can work on your projects from yesterday.